Good evening, everyone. Right. Welcome to this committee. I'm the chair of the committee on Jeanette Association. Before the meeting starts, I've got some announcements. In the case of a fire, a bell will ring continuously. If this occurs, please leave the building immediately, following the green exit signs, out to the assembly point, which is by the War Memorial on Duke Street. If anyone requires assistance, please let me know. Lifts should not be used. Please remain at the assembly point and don't attempt to return to the building until you've been advised it's safe to do so. The toilets are situated on the landing at the top of the main staircase and on the ground floor in the customer service area. Please turn off your mobile phones during the meeting. Anyone attending this meeting can film it. But I should point out that only officers, councillors and anyone sitting around these tables may be filmed. Members of the public should not be filmed, so please ensure that cameras are only pointed in this direction. This meeting is also being broadcast via YouTube and recorded. When you're speaking, please may I remind the committee to ensure you turn on your microphone and speak closely into it. A red light will appear on the middle button to indicate that your microphone is switched on. When finished speaking, please remember to turn your microphone off again, and that also applies elsewhere. Apologies for absence, Dan.
Thank you, Chair. I've had apologies from Councillors Lee and Papa, and Councillor Hazel Clark is subbing for Councillor Lee.
Right, thank you. We have declarations of interest, item 3. All members are reminded they must disclose any interest they know they have in items of business on the meeting's agenda, and they must do so at this point on the agenda or as soon as they become aware of the interest. If the interest is a disclosable pecuniary interest, they're also obliged to notify the monitoring officer within 28 days of the meeting. We have some. Yes.
Yeah, Steve Hall. I will go to the public side for item 8 because I'm predetermined on that.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Dobson.
Thank you, Chair. I will be calling this the item number 9 in, and therefore I will sit over there. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I also have a declaration which is about applications 6 and 7. I need to declare a non-registrable interest, as I did when back in June 2023, when the original application came before the committee. This is because proposed condition 19 is concerned with fencing of that part of the site which adjoins the Kegs playing field, and my husband is a foundation governor of Kegs. Condition 19 consists only of a very small element of the application, and is there in part to protect the public visual amenity. It's not, as I understand it, controversial. However, I've decided in the interests of both consistency and transparency to recuse myself from the determination of the application. Instead, Councillor Dobson, as Vice Chair, will chair this item. Given she will be chairing this item, it also makes sense for her to chair related item 7, even though, strictly speaking, I don't have a registrable interest or non-registrable interest in this item. So I have to step out for, and Councillor Dobson will take over. Moving on to the minutes, is it your wish that I sign them as a true record of the last meeting? Thank you. Right, now we will move on to public question time. Are there any people who wish to speak at this moment, or waiting until their item is closed?
Yeah, they're just going to speak on the items, Chair.
Right, thank you.
Thanks.
So I'll leave that. Each person has 2 minutes, and in theory we have a maximum of 20 minutes for each application for questions and statements. So when you are called, please keep to your 2 minutes, as we know we have a lot of people to get through tonight. I'll move on then to item 6, and Councillor Dobson will take over.
Right, thank you very much. The next 2 items, because they are very much linked, will be taken together as with one presentation. That's correct. The first item is number 6, which is application number 20-02064 OUT, which is the strategic growth site north of Woodhouse Lane, Broomfield, Chelmsford. And item 7, which is application number 21-00881 FUL, Broomfield Hospital, Hospital Approach, Broomfield. Can I have the officer report, please?
Of course, thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So you will already have seen the 2 reports in your agenda pack, and as Councillor Dobson just said, the 2 applications are intrinsically linked to one another, and they rely on one another. So we're presenting the 2 together as we have done previously. The applications follow an approved master plan and comply with the requirements of the Chelmsford adopted local plan. There have been 2 previous committee resolutions to approve the applications subject to Section 106 agreements and conditions. But I must reiterate that the applications have not been determined. So just to run you through very, very quickly, in August 2022, the applications were first presented to the Planning Committee, and the committee resolved that the applications be approved subject to a Section 106 agreement, the conditions as outlined in the report, and a mechanism to secure the delivery of a link road. Then, following that planning committee, officers worked with Bloor Homes, who are the applicant and developer for the site. We also worked with the Hospital Trust in an effort to secure the provision of the link road. But the NHS Trust subsequently confirmed that agreement over future maintenance of the link road couldn't be reached. So essentially, in light of that, the parties agreed an alternative transport strategy, which came in the form of a financial contribution, and that was in lieu of the hospital link road. The committee in June 2023 subsequently resolved that the application be approved subject to the completion of the Section 106 agreement, including the alternative transport strategy, and the conditions as outlined in the report. So, as you'll have read, since the last committee meeting in June 2023, the Section 106 agreement has been drafted and the finer details of the clauses have been negotiated. It has come to light that some minor amendments to the conditions and the heads of terms for the Section 106 agreement are necessary. Therefore, we're seeking the committee's agreement before proceeding because the previous resolution was the applications to be approved subject to the Section 106 agreement and the conditions. We're now slightly tweaking those conditions, as you'll have read in the report. So we're bringing the applications back to committee just for agreement. And those amendments are detailed in your report. But just for quickness, and clarity. First change, the first amendment is introducing flexibility on first homes. This is because in December 2024, the revised National Planning Policy Framework no longer requires the provision of first homes. So we're introducing flexibility in the Section 106 agreement to allow for the dwellings to either be delivered as first homes or shared ownership properties. The second amendment is relating to conditions 28 and 29. The proposal is to remove those conditions because the residential travel packs and the Smarter Choices campaign that they relate to are dealt with in the Section 106 agreement, and we're told by national guidance not to duplicate conditions and Section 106 obligations. So it's just a removal of those conditions because they're dealt with in the Section 106. We are proposing to remove a heads of term which was included in the previous report relating to biodiversity net gain. That shouldn't have been included in the previous report. It should have been deleted because the biodiversity net gain is on site, so that doesn't need to be covered by the Section 106 agreement. And it was only in that initial list when the hospital link road was proposed. So there's no change to the biodiversity net gain that would be delivered. It's just that we don't need it in the Section 106 agreement because it will be dealt with by the conditions by the on-site landscaping. And the final amendment is to increase the Essex Coast RAMS tariff to bring it in line with our current tariff, because what was quoted in the report was the tariff from 2023. So just in conclusion, you will have obviously seen the previous reports which are included in the agenda pack. So we're really only focusing on what the proposed amendments are tonight. Obviously you can reach your own decision on the applications, but there have been those two previous resolutions to grant. So, as set out in the report, the proposed amendments are acceptable. We therefore are seeking your agreement to approve the applications subject to the Section 106 agreement and compliance with the conditions. And you'll have also noted on the report the recommendation is slightly different to what the recommendation was last time, in that the recommendation includes a degree of flexibility so that the Chair, Vice Chair and Keith Holmes have a delegated power to agree any minor changes to conditions, which could avoid the need to come back to committee every time we need to make a slight tweak to a condition or correct a word or something. So happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. And I don't believe there are any public... there's Councillor Steele. Oh, sorry, Councillor Steele, would you like to speak?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm kind of here for the last item, but this item's in my ward as well, so I want to say a few words about it, if I may. It's been a long time coming back to the Planning Committee. I have been to the previous meetings when S106 was the issue. I think I expressed my disappointment at previous meetings, and I'll express it again, my disappointment with the NHS Trust in not signing up to the access at the end of the link road, which was a much better solution in terms of traffic, but I know that's gone, and the solution instead that's offered is the funding of the PNR shuttle. I will say that if you didn't know, that the Essex County Council are already running the shuttle for the hospital at the moment, because it was done in coordination with the car parking charges for staff being resumed, so it had to be put in place at the same time. I do concur that the changes and closures to parts of Woodhouse Lane are still required, absolutely. As a county councillor, rat running, or as we politically now have to call them, alternative route finders, are the bane of my life. So let's stop that from the very start, please. And that's great that that's been done. I think at one time there was, and this is a question now, is there is there any allocation or support to a byway open to all traffic, active travel boat across the valley from Essex Regiment Way? I think that was on the cards at one time, so I'm asking if is that still being pursued? You know, cycle route between Essex Regiment Way and Broomfield Road, which obviously would help as well. And then finally, I guess we have to support it, but as I say, I'd rather be sitting here knowing that the access via the other entrance was the option to reduce the traffic down Broomfield Road, but it's gone. So thank you very much for letting me speak, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Steele. Would you like to answer Councillor Steele's point?
Just a quick one in response to your question about a route across the valley. Yes, there is an aspiration in the Section 106 agreement still for a financial contribution towards active travel across that valley. So, yeah.
Right. Thank you. If there's no other public questions, I'll throw the open to the floor. So, anybody who'd like to start? Councillor Hyland.
Thank you, Chair. I noted you responded to one of my questions with regards to the impact of the amendments on the biodiversity net gain is going to be in the site rather than outside the site, because there was a major impact by having the road there. So can you just give us a little bit more insight as to what the biodiversity net gain on site to mitigate the loss of the road is? And during the removal of the smart choices from the planning conditions, have any legal enforcement issues arose? Are the S106 obligations legally enforceable? And are planning conditions stronger undertakings than obligations? Thank you.
On biodiversity net gain, the link road was the element of the previous proposal that would have had a big impact on biodiversity net gain. When the link road was removed from the proposal, essentially there's no need to have a biodiversity net gain because the link road isn't taking any biodiversity away from that woodland. The biodiversity net gain purely relates to the residential development site, and that will easily be delivered on site through our normal landscaping requirements. On the removal of Smarter Choices campaign and kind of legal enforceability, the Smarter Choices campaign will be part of the Section 106 agreement. Section 106 agreements are legally enforceable through an injunction. An injunction is I would say, the strongest enforcement power that we have. It's certainly stronger than a breach of condition notice, for example. So yeah, it's still enforceable, and it's a strong power should we ever need to get to that position. But the test for an injunction is quite high, but it is possible.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to make a comment? Ask a question? No? Okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Large.
Sorry, just very quickly. Just really to say that I'm perfectly happy with the changes. I think I wasn't very happy with the original application, but I accept that it's been accepted by the committee and that these changes to the conditions are fine in my view, so I'll be voting in favour.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hyland, back again.
Thank you, Chair. Is there any compliance measures to ensure that the phasing plan is kept to as the build goes on, so people, residents are disrupted as least as possible? And also, along the Broomfield Road, is there actually any room to accommodate laybys for buses? Because if you now add the park and ride to the road blockage, buses tend to get in the way of the cars. So is there any mitigation by having laybys on the way?
On compliance, compliance with phasing and compliance with conditions would be dealt with the same as any other compliance matters are. So our enforcement team, if a complaint was raised that phasing or compliance wasn't being adhered to, we could investigate that as we normally do any other enforcement case. In terms of bus lay-bys on Broomfield Road, that's not something that forms part of this proposal. I don't know whether the Highway Authority have scoped out the possibility or the space for lay-bys, but they're not needed to make this development acceptable, so that would be a separate highway matter.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay, in which case I will move to the voting. Although the two applications have been discussed together, each one will be voted on separately. So therefore, I will take for item 6, I move that application 20-02064 OUT, Strategic Growth Site north of Woodhouse Lane, Broomfield, Chelmsford, Essex, be approved, subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement and compliance with the following conditions detailed at pages 23 to 34 of the agenda pack. The details, minor variations of which would be delegated to the Director of Sustainable Communities, Planning Development Services Manager in liaison with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Planning Committee. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Wilson, thank you. Can you just show of hands, all those in favour, please? I think that's unanimous. There's no one against. I haven't missed anybody. No, that's fine. Okay, in that case, I will move on to item 7. I move that application 21-00881 FUL, Broomfield Hospital, Hospital Approach, Broomfield, Chelmsford, CM1 7ET be approved, subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement and compliance with the following conditions detailed at pages 165 to 166 of the agenda pack. The details / minor variations of which would be delegated to the Director of Sustainable Communities, Planning Development Services Manager in liaison with the Chair, Vice Chair of the Planning Committee. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Wilson, thank you. All those in favour, please, raise your hands. Again, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Those two applications are approved. And I think we can have the chairman back. Thank you.
Right, thanks everyone. We now move on. Bear with us a minute. Okay. We now come to number 8, land west of the Fox and Raven. You have a green sheet. Have you seen your green sheet today? There was an update middle of the day, I think. Land west of Fox and Raven, Chelmer Village Way, Chelmer Village, Chelmsford, Essex. Can we have the officer's report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So this agenda item is the land west of the Fox and Raven in Chelmer Village Way. So the site comprises of an irregular shaped plot, approximately 1.6 hectares, and it lies to the south of Chelmer Village Way. Whilst it's adjacent to the urban area boundary, it does lie outside of it. Now lies within the rural area, the Green Wedge, It also lies within the conservation area. It's close to listed buildings, as denoted on this plan. It's also bordered by established landscaping and trees, which are protected due to the site's location in the conservation area. It's also located in flood zones 1, 2 and 3. However, the site is in a very sustainable location. The urban area boundary is to the north. It's also adjacent to the national cycle route that runs basically in front of the site, and westward that leads off-road into the city centre. So you can see in this map here, there's like a very faint purple line that denotes the urban area boundary. So basically everything to the north lies within the urban area, as well as those properties in Millview Road. So we have some pictures here just showing sort of the site locality. So across the road, so directly across the road, is Chelmsford Retail Park. Then we have the Fox and Raven pub that lies adjacent to it. Then we're looking further west to the roundabouts, the A138 roundabouts, and that Chelmsford Road development that sits on that junction. Again, some more pictures, just giving some site context. So we have the front of the site and where the proposed entrance is. On the top right, we're looking east, and the Fox and Raven pub is behind that. So that's the trees and landscaping that front the site there. And then down the bottom there, that's sort of a view on the approach to Chelmsford Retail Park. So you can see the site is indicated there, surrounded by trees and landscaping. And then beyond is the green wedge in the floodplain and the area of the transferred land. And finally, this is a picture taken from the south, so looking towards the site to the north. As you can see, the site is shown there. And behind is the urban fabric of the Chelmsford Retail Park, and again, that Chelmsford Road development to the west. So the proposal is for 55 units, a mix of houses and flats, ranging from 1 to 4 bedrooms. It is an 100% affordable housing scheme, and it has a tenure mix of 44% affordable rent, equating to 24 units, and 56 shared ownership, equating to 31 units. As part of the proposal, 9 4-bedroom affordable rent units are proposed. Also included in the proposal is the transfer of land to the south and east of the residential parcel, so land that's within the applicant's ownership, so blue land, as shown as parcels B and C, and it's proposed to transfer that into public ownership. So you can see on the map here where the residential parcel is, and those parcels B and C. So this is the layout of the site. It's essentially 3 perimeter blocks known as courtyards 1, 2 and 3, separated by landscaping and green space. It draws concepts from the farmhouses or farmsteads within the conservation area, but it is inherently more urban. And you can see denoted on the southern boundary is that proposed landscape bund that routes around the southern boundary and the east and western boundaries of the site. So this is just to give you a flavour of the developments. We're starting with Courtyard 1. This is deliberately set back, so it sits in line with the rear building line of that listed building next door, and the scale is restricted to 2 stories only. And to the south of that is a proposed orchard. So then moving through the site to the central courtyard, again, the scale is predominantly restricted to 2-storey, save for those corner properties on the end there, so plots 28 and 29. As we move through the site, continuing west towards the more urban character of the A138 roundabout, the scale rises to 2.5 to 3 stories. These are some visuals provided by the developer. So at the top there, we have a view from Chelmsford Village Way, so that's the entrance to the development site. And the bottom visual there is inside the site looking eastwards. The top view is the view you would get on the eastern parcel of the site, so basically the view you would be afforded from the A138 roundabout. And the bottom there is essentially showing that orchard that's to the south of So turning to the principle of development. So whilst adjacent, it still lies outside of the urban area boundary within the rural area and the green wedge. And the proposal doesn't fall with any forms of development that policies of those land designations would allow. We have an up-to-date development plan, so those policies are sound, and we can demonstrate a 5-year land supply. Planning law requires applications to be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So the starting point for this proposal is the development is unacceptable in principle. So we now are in the scenario of looking at material considerations on the principle of development. So the first material consideration is the delivery of affordable housing. As members may be aware, the Council has declared a housing crisis in the supply of affordable housing and has set out strategies to try and boost that supply, particularly with family homes of 3 to 4 bedrooms. As part of the proposal, 24 affordable rent units would be delivered, and they are the key component of the scheme as they aid in meeting the priority housing need for those on the Council's housing register. Out of those 24 units, 9 would be 4-bedroom units, so those larger, much-needed family units that there is a serious undersupply of. The proposal also includes shared ownership, which is a affordable housing product that is supported by the government and to which there's evidence that shows that there is still a demand for that in Chelmsford. Overall, the delivery of a 100% affordable housing scheme weighs significantly in favour of the proposal. Then we look at the sustainability of the site. It is in a highly sustainable location, so adjacent to the national cycle route, which again leads into the city centre off-road. It's across the road from Chelmsford Retail Park and other local services. It's in the vicinity of bus stops, play spaces and the wider city centre. So the sustainability credentials of the site weigh in favour of the scheme. Also included in the proposal is the transfer of land, so approximately 29 hectares in total, to the south and east of the development parcel. This land is identified in the Council's local plan as open space, recreational space, that plays a role in conserving and enhancing the environment. However, this land is in private ownership. So there is a public benefit in acquiring this land into public ownership to continue and enhance its role as per that designation. The City Council has also identified the importance of rivers and waterways in and around Chelmsford and has identified options and opportunities to enhance these spaces, so improving their attractiveness, recreational use and appearance. So transferring this land aligns with the Council's corporate objectives to incorporate land along the Riverway into its green portfolio to improve accessibility and enhance its recreational use. So again, there is a public benefit that weighs in favour of the scheme. However, it is recognised that there would be harm by virtue of the proposal. The proposal would impact on the rural area and green wedge by the loss of an undeveloped and rural field that contributes to the character and appearance of these land designations. It would represent a greater urbanisation along the south side of Chelmsford Village Way. However, we do need to look at the site in the round. So, as previously said, it does lie adjacent to the urban area boundary. And the built-up form of the urban area can be seen in the background of the site when viewed from the south and indeed along Chelmsford Village Way. So the site doesn't sit in isolation and it wouldn't be wholly out of keeping with the development to the north or to the west, for example, Chelmsford Road development. However, the site does include the removal of trees and landscaping. A lot of that is to do with the awkward shape of the plot, particularly as it narrows to the west. To try and achieve good design, mainly with that perimeter block enclosure and the use of that landscape bund, it does necessitate that tree removal. Normally that tree removal would be resisted because of the trees being protected, being in the conservation area. However, there are policy provisions that do allow, in exceptional circumstances, the removal of those trees where there is an identified public benefit. A robust landscaping scheme is proposed as part of the development, and that includes planting 198 new trees, which include higher carbon credit scoring trees to help mitigate the loss of that tree and landscaping. However, overall, there will be landscape harm, and this needs to be weighed against the public benefits of the scheme. The site is close to Grade 2 listed buildings, as again denoted on this plan. It's also located in a conservation area. The proposal has been carefully designed to try and mitigate the heritage impact. So, as shown previously, the setback of Courtyard 1, the restriction in scale, the use of landscaping and general design. However, there will be harm to heritage assets, and that harm equates to less than substantial. That is the position of the City Council and Historic England, who have raised comments to the proposal. In accordance with national and local policy, we have to afford great weight to that harm, and that needs to be weighed against the public benefits of the scheme. So the site does lie within flood zones 1, 2 and 3, with the western section of the site falling in those greater flood zones, which coincides with the land levels gently falling away on the southern section of the site. As required by national and local policies, a sequential test an exception test is required to be undertaken for development in those higher flood zones, so that southern section of the site. They have been undertaken, and the council considers that they have been passed. To mitigate the impact of the development, particularly on the southern section of the site, a number of mitigation measures are proposed, including a landscape bund to the southern, eastern and western sections of the site. A hydraulic modelling assessment has been submitted, and that confirms that the bund would protect the development from flooding. It would only marginally impact on on-site flood levels compared to baseline levels in an area where there's no built form, and to which the bund would be adjacent to, providing a flood protection. Crucially, the hydraulic report demonstrates that the bund would not cause flooding to other properties or flooding downstream. Other mitigation measures include setting finished floor levels above predicted design vent fluvial levels, taking account of climate change. Sustainable urban drainage is proposed to manage surface water, and no objections, quite crucially, have been raised by statutory consultees, so the Environment Agency, Lead Local Flood Authority or Anglian Water. And here we just have a section through of the site, and this demonstrates where those finished floor levels sit, and that bund sits comparative to those flood levels in design storm event. Turning to design, layout and appearance, the proposal has been carefully designed to take account of the site's constraints, the land designations and the setting. It employs a material palette of buff brick, slate roofs and black timber boarding. It uses gables, brick detailing, articulation, fenestration to give the development interest. The 3 courtyards are complemented by landscaping permeating through the site, and the development has connections to the National Cycle Route and that transferred land to the south. The proposal is generally policy compliant in design standards. Where there are lower provisions or flexibility, these are justified on designed grounds and are set clearly out in the officer's report. Overall, it's considered that the site meets good placemaking principles and design. There are a number of highway mitigation measures proposed, including a signalised crossing on Chelmsford Village Way. To accommodate this requires a part lane closure on the westbound approach to that crossing. After that crossing, continuing west, the carriageway returns to 2 lanes. It also includes a new westbound bus stop and changes to the national cycle route, so it's set slightly further into the site, so the site access is LTN 120 compliant, and there's no conflict between vehicles and cyclists. The proposal includes a lower parking provision, but the site falls within the city boundaries, according to the council's local policy maps within the city centre, where a lower parking provision is usually allowed and justified. Highways have raised no objections to the proposal in terms of the mitigation measures, the lower parking provision, and they do not conclude that the development raises unacceptable traffic and congestion. Also set out in the committee report is various other design standards that the development needs to meet. So in terms of accessible and wheelchair housing on an off-site open space, biodiversity net gain, and the health and education impacts are considered acceptable. Also set out in the committee report is a package of Section 106 measures. So the committee report clearly sets out the harm and benefit of the scheme and undertakes an exercise of a weighted balance. So when looking at the harm of the development, there is harm caused by being contrary to the development plan. There's also harm caused for the impact to the rural area in Green Wedge. There's also heritage harm, which is concluded to be less than substantial, but is still afforded great weight. There's also harm through the removal of trees and landscaping. In terms of the benefits of the scheme, it is in a highly sustainable location, so located adjacent to the urban area boundary, local facilities, pedestrian and cycle links, and some sustainable measures are proposed. It also includes a comprehensive landscaping scheme to try and mitigate the loss of those trees and landscaping. And it also includes the transfer of land into public ownership. But most notably, the significant benefit is the delivery of affordable housing. Again, in the context of us declaring a housing crisis and there being an unprecedented need for affordable housing. The proposal includes those 24 affordable rent units, which would boost supply of housing for those in the greatest need, and would include 9 of those 4-bedroom properties, those larger family homes, which are much needed. It also includes 31 shared ownership properties. So the delivery of a 100% affordable housing scheme has significant public benefits. When considering the weighted balance, so the benefits of the scheme, most notably the delivery of affordable housing to meet identified needs, are cumulatively considered to outweigh the totality of harm identified, including the less than substantial harm caused to heritage. In the context of paragraph 12 of the National Planning Policy Framework, in this site-specific case, the material considerations of the proposal justify a departure from the development plan. So the committee report recommends approval subject to the completion of a Section 106 and with compliance with the conditions set out in the committee report and the green sheet.
Thank you. Now we have quite a few people to speak. If you'd like, you could put those down and stop your arms aching. We have seen the information inside, so we know you've got them, and it would be nice if we could actually not get distracted by them. Thank you. The first, can we please continue? Okay, it's just your arms are going to ache eventually. First of all, we have Sean Martin to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. My name is Sean Martin, and I'm the planning manager at Stonebond, which is a family-run house builder based in Chelmsford that specialises in delivering affordable housing. I am here today to assure you of our commitment to deliver the quality development in your authority and confirm that we fully intend to implement this permission as soon as you grant the necessary consents. The application before you is the culmination of 4 years of collaborative work with Countryside and Chelmsford City Council. I'm acutely aware of the little time I have to address this committee in relation to this important application, and I will now list the public and community benefits that this application will offer. 55 new affordable homes, providing 249 bed spaces, helping to alleviate the much publicised housing crisis in Chelmsford, of which 44% will be affordable rent and 56% will be shared ownership. We are proposing to deliver 23 3- and 4-bed family homes, meeting the greatest identified need. A new pedestrianised crossing along Chelmsford Village Way, creating a better connectivity for existing and future residents to the country park. New bus stop and cycleway, creating a better connectivity. 198 new trees, including community orchard, and in excess of 10% biodiversity net gain. Transfer of 78 acres of land to the City Council at no cost, securing the land in public ownership in perpetuity, which will enable the Council's ambition to create a country park. And finally, over £240,000 of 106 contributions towards healthcare and local infrastructure. Your officer has confirmed that the report that we produced, a scheme is policy compliant, has the full support of the statutory consultees. I therefore especially accept your officer's recommendations so that we can start delivering much needed new homes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We need to let everybody have their chance, okay? David Frost, would you like to speak, please? Again, everybody has 2 minutes.
But of course, Madam Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to yourself and the committee this evening. Many won't know me, but I was a councillor for Springfield for 10 years. I served on the planning committee for 10 years, and I was a chairman for 3 years. And I don't normally get involved these days because of age and ill health, but I was very concerned about this planning application coming through. And I spent this afternoon looking at the local observations and compliments. There's 143, which I doubt many of you will have read the total amount. 3 of them were in favour and 140 were against. I can't remember any planning application in front of me that had that degree of local concern. When I sat on this committee, one of the first things I was taught by planning officers was the danger of precedents, justifiable exceptions of policy, they were often called. And I am concerned about that, because we're looking tonight, you are, about this proposed development, and just before you get there, on the other side of the A12, there's a bund along there where the new high-powered gas station or facilities are going to be. So you've got a bund, then you've got the road, then you're proposed to have another bund here. Now, I lived at Prentice's Farm, which is one of the listed buildings referred to in the report, and certain times of the year, when I dug a hole to put a new tree in, which I did quite regularly, it would very often fill up with water.
I'm afraid your time is up, David. Can you come to a conclusion, please?
Yes, there is a danger of precedent here.
Thank you.
Let me summarise that in that the other side of the water floodplain is Great Baddow, and the ridgeway coming down to the floodplain. And what you're doing here, if this is agreed, is you're setting a precedent for a bund along that piece of land on the ridgeway up to Baddow. And
I'm sorry, David, you have to stop. The others will come in with information as well, so thank you very much.
I don't think they will, but there we are. We are what we are.
Thank you.
You'll be wrong.
Can we have Russell Ford, please?
Thank you, Chairman. This recommendation is absolutely outrageous. The affordable housing crisis is a national phenomenon, not a local one. There is no quick fix. The solution should be local plan-led, not contrived in this way. Identifying land to meet need in the least environmentally damaging way is a local plan responsibility. Sensitive land with unique qualities should be preserved. A delivery mechanism for the country park should also come through the local plan. This gives the public certainty. The gift of 29 hectares of land unconnected to the development breaks the rules for contributions. It's an inducement designed to encourage the council to act improperly. Your officers have not applied the tests. Is the gift necessary, directly related to the development, reasonably related in scale and kind to the development? None of these are satisfied. The application fails right there. The sequential test area has been contrived to be as small as possible to find no suitable sites to avoid a technical knockout. A strategic need requires a borough-wide strategic search area. The tiny search area used is not fit for purpose. The former construction compound is a red herring. You have reinstatement provisions. Historic England recommends refusal. The concentration of listed buildings, conservation area and green wedge in a 19th century landscape contribute to this conclusion. Neither will come and go, but once the setting is gone, it's gone forever. Chelmsford Road marks a clear division between urban and rural, modern and historic, dry land and wetland. Let us preserve this for future generations. That is the essence of sustainability. Overall, if you knock out the gift of land and the implausible sequential test, this application is dead in the water, quite literally. I urge you to refuse planning permissions for the issues I've set out. I recommend caution in your voting and a recording of individual votes. We will consider judicial review. Please consider a member's site visit, and if you've not taken in anything I have said, just look at the 3 photographs I sent you of the site underwater.
Thank you. Can we move on, please, to Mark Walner?
Thank you, Chairman. No one disputes the need for affordable housing, which is a nationwide problem, but unsuitable, environmentally damaging developments such as this are just not a solution. Key issues with this application: firstly, flood risk. Others will speak about flood risk, but who do you believe? Real-life experience of local residents or out-of-date Environment Agency maps? Secondly, harm to the conservation area. The applicants have tried to mitigate the harm caused by misleadingly stating that the site has lost its character and is more in keeping with the Chelmsford Retail Park, and by its use as a former temporary construction compound. Those of us who live close to the site know this is just not true. The application site remains a fully integrated part of the Chelmsford Flood Meadows, which a site visit would confirm. Historic England recommend refusal. Thirdly and finally, the original and revised applications are surrounded by secrecy, lack of transparency, unusual practice, and inaccurately assessed information provided by third parties, and will lead at the very least to Phase 2 planning and development as lead consultants being referred to the RTPI for breaching their code of practice. Why has the Council, over a period of more than 1 year from the original application, allowed the applicants to continue to meet and have conversations with them instead of the usual practice of refusing the application if not withdrawn? Why has 29 hectares of land without any obvious link to the proposed site been gifted in order to introduce a public benefit argument and without satisfying the tests of a Section 106 agreement? Why has a flood risk sequential test been manipulated to cover the smallest possible area, with unusually the responsibility for checking the test left to the Council? What experienced person has vetted this? Why has misleading information been provided to try to show that the site has lost its character as part of the flood meadows and countryside? With these facts considered objectively, any reasonable person would surely refuse planning permission. I urge you to do the same.
Thank you. Leonora Walner?
Our watermill is 1 mile from Chelmsford's floodgates and a few hundred yards from the proposed site. We've lived there for 26 years, actively helping to manage the water flow, maximising the pull from Chelmsford and the push towards Sandford Mill downriver. Did you know that the catchment area for the three rivers that meet just before the central floodgates is large, 206 square miles? These floodgates were installed in the 60s before the A12 bypass was built, mainly on floodplain, in 86. Today, the floodgates flush 3 times more water through them than in 1970. This figure rises every year. Yet the central permeable floodplain is being reduced in size because of development. Flood patterns, high water flows to Sandford Mill and under the A12, and then bottlenecks. It backs up towards our city, over the meads towards Manor Farm, the Army and Navy. This is a 3-day event when it's full. At the same time, the floodplain close to and including the development site fills. It spreads to the river to its south, east towards our sluice gates, west under the Chelmsford Bridge and back into the city. Flood pressure here is high due to its centrally linked location, lack of management, ongoing works and development. It can flood after between 8 and 12 hours rainfall. That happened 2 weeks ago. Changing weather patterns. There's not been a 3-day event since major development in the catchment area, but water flow is increasing due to runoff from development concrete. And 2 days and a night's consistent rainfall can now total to around an 80% coverage of the complete floodplain. Let's call this a high water event. There have been 9 3-day events, there have been 9 3-day events since 2000, plus circa 20 high water events within the last 3 years. The last 3 being 21, 23 and 24 in April, which has never happened before. You may have seen our photographs. And the site's entrance onto Chalmer Village Way is the natural entry point for surface water runoff after torrential rain and was needed in August 21 and 22 when the level of water there went up 7 inches. See the EA map. It shows the entry gates as being the area for water entry.
Thank you.
Please refuse this permission.
Thank you very much. Can we move on to Mike Parker, please?
Can I video you, Mike?
Yeah, sure.
I'll point it this way.
Madam Chair, before I start, may I make some points of order and report some code of conduct violations, please, outside of my allotted time?
Mike, you have 2 minutes, so please use those 2 minutes.
Well, just so the public know you're not allowing me to make those. Right, the correct designation for the southern part of this site based on observation and the photographs that are all behind me here is functional floodplain 3B because it floods every year now, pretty much. In February I stood in the floodwaters and filmed a video explaining why this is a foolish place to build, the bund won't work and the suds will be underwater. The developer has misled this council with unrepresentative groundwater readings during the driest summer for decades. My analysis of hydrometric data shows that high cumulative inflows, or floods, have tripled since the 70s with no increase in rainfall, suggesting the cause is increased runoff. Published analysis by Hannaford reported that peak flows have increased across the country. The magnitude of this trend warrants investigation before this council considers building by or on floodplain. We're building our city at Chelmsford, ever closer to the river, and our floodplain was cut in half by the A12, doubling the flood risk, and we've shown it holds water back in drone footage and video on the ground, and that floodwater doesn't even flow through the storm drain. You're holding back water towards the city and being complacent about the danger. Just 1 centimetre of rainfall over our catchment is 5.3 million cubic metres of water, over 2,000 Olympic swimming pools, and the Met Office are predicting 8 centimetres will become a regular occurrence. The biggest flood this century here was 19 million cubic metres over 7 days, but that's nothing compared to the floods we had in the 50s. Today, with more runoff and a floodplain half the size it was, a flood like that now will be devastating. The Borough Council designated this conservation area in 1991 and Green Wedge in 2008. We've been protecting this for decades. This proposal violates more policies than it complies with, Councillors, please err on the side of caution tonight and reject this reckless application, or will you reschedule this decision once planners have done due diligence by actually investigating the findings that I reported and so many residents have confirmed? Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Peter Coling. Peter Coling.
Thank you, Madam Chair, councillors. I refer to the transport assessment as in the original plans, document 8788441. And a quote from there from 5.10, that the signalised crossing of Chelmsford Village Way is considered unjustifiable, right? It goes on to say that the peak traffic by 2028 will reach near maximum capacity. This crossing, right, will take down from 2 lanes each way to 2 lanes east, 1 lane west. Will divert water into the site at times of flood until we get a proper plan in place for the transport. We don't have one. The Essex County Council Transport Authority agreed to no such crossing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have this. We have Councillor Byrne Langra. Sorry if I haven't spelled so.
It's Councillor Byrne LaGrew, Chairman. It's not me. Normally, as dual-hatted as Chair of Chelmsford Village Council, I would have spoken, but because I'm Deputy Mayor this year, I'm not able to speak. So Councillor Byrne LaGrew is my Deputy Chair, and she's going to give you the Chelmsford Village input.
Okay, thank you. I didn't, sorry if I got it slightly wrong.
It's okay, I'm used to it. Having received unprecedented both formal and informal feedback from the residents of Chelmsford Village and Chancellor Park, a comprehensive review by the Village Council's Planning Committee, objections were submitted to the city. The parish is essentially urban by nature, comprising housing fringed by industrial and retail businesses, and our residents have very little access to natural open space. The Water Meadows site is especially valuable for recreation, crisscrossed by public footpaths and riverbank access. Having studied the various comments made and the report submitted by the planning officer, Chelmsford Village Council would like to draw your attention to the following reasons for the committee to refuse this application, which is not in the current local plan. Firstly, the area is a floodplain and does regularly flood. Councillors will recall the flooding following the recent named Storm Henk, where drone footage showed the entire application area underwater. This area protects Chelmsford from the more damaging and significant flooding elsewhere upstream of and adjacent to the meadows, which is its purpose. Large parts of our village area are low-lying and vulnerable. With climate change, floods are becoming more frequent. We are unconvinced by the data provided in the application regarding the strategic flood risk. The groundwater survey was taken in 2022 after a period of near drought and is not indicative of average norms and should be repeated. Secondly, Chelmsford's own policies for the Green Wedge do not permit development except for specific purposes. We accept one of those purposes, named is affordable housing, but this is limited by policy to small sites. The 55 homes plan are more than 4 times greater than allowed in policy DM2. This surely is a reason for rejection. This proposal devalues the quality of designated conservation areas, which is essentially rough pasture. The previous construction compound relating to the viaduct construction has been removed. The development diminishes the quality of the area. Residents enjoy the mature trees and ancient hedgerows that will be lost if this application goes ahead. The setting of the historic buildings is degraded as identified by Historic England's submission, and it is nonsense to refer to the retail park for design comparison. The retail units are across a 4-lane road and no way affect people's perception of the meadows as rural. Additionally, Chelmsford Village Council see no logical link between this application and the new country park in the area. Currently, our constituents enjoy all the benefits of a natural environment. The cost of a more managed park will fall on the residents of Chelmsford Village and Chancellor Park and should only be considered as a separate planning application once the City Council decides to buy or otherwise take ownership of the land in question. A final significant reason to reject is the application to traffic congestion. At present, experience shows that the 1838 traffic congestion from the Army and Navy junction queues back to the Chelmsford Village Way in the rush hour and at weekends. Shoppers at the retail park cause roadblocks. We suffer this daily, and the proposed new plan in no way mitigates the traffic congestion in this area. In conclusion, the Chelmsford Village Council wishes to state its objections to the application in the strongest possible terms. We hope that the committee members agree and will vote against acceptance. Previous applications for this site have been refused. Thank you. I've got it. It wasn't bad.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try not to repeat a lot of that information, but needless to say, I concur with the residents and the parish council, their comments. So I'll try not to repeat all of that. I've lived in the area of the Fox and Raven for 32 years now, so I've got some visual experience of what goes on there, and when it rains, what happens. And its sustained rainfall is an incredible effect on the area just past the Fox and Raven, including the site that we're talking about. I have seen it flooded substantially and taking quite a long time to disperse as well. And that, is happening, I would say, with more frequency. We've had instances, for example, in the past where animals, farm animals and horses were evacuated from the fields there. It was that serious to get them away from the flood. So it definitely happens. People tell me it's not on the floodplain. Geologically, that might be the definition, but I can tell you it does happen, and fairly regularly as well. I am very concerned, of course, but replacing what is a natural area, which has natural drainage, off of the road, etc., works pretty well. Replacing that with concrete, albeit probably designed to absorb water, can it actually take that much water and disperse it, and where does it go? I do worry about a lot of the displacement of that water affecting my residents' property beyond the new development. I'm also worried about the residents in the new development as well, because there is surface water that runs off of 2 major roads there, Chelmsford Village Way and the A138. And I don't have confidence that, knowing you know, the land there, and we've already seen this on the other side with the gas main being replaced, that has been delayed because of flooding. It backs up all the way up to that area. That could have a similar effect, you know, going forward. It seems as though, you know, we talk about a housing crisis. I get it. I understand we need affordable homes, but we've also got a climate crisis as well, and that needs to be thought about when we're planning in these areas. We've seen horror stories from other parts of the country, and I would not like that to happen in Chelmsford, particularly in Chelmer Village. So I think we need to weigh up the risk here, and the potential risk of climate change on this. Now, I know, you know, the proposal basically says that they've allowed for that margin with the bunds and the suds, but I'm not wholly confident of that, that would work. I'm not an expert, but having listened to the Warners who run the regulation of the water within the mill, I got a balanced opinion of how this would work, and I do fear the worst, unfortunately, and I don't necessarily agree with the fact that you weigh up the benefits and they outweigh the harm, the risks, because I think if you've got risk like this, you should not be doing it. You should not be in this area. We do have a plan, and Chelmsford have been very good at putting together a plan and planning, and we have 5 years worth of developments that will include affordable homes. So I think we're in good shape as a council to meet the statutory requirements. So I don't accept that for this size of a development that we need to take the risk and add this to the portfolio. I'll quickly move on. Green Wedge, someone mentioned precedent, and Green Wedge is lovely because Chelmer Village Way formed a very nice barrier from the residential area in Chelmer Village, which we all enjoy, to the area that couldn't be developed and was subject to flood. It was a very natural way of demarcating the two areas. And I think that still stands, and the Green Wedge strengthened that. And the gentleman made the point about precedent, and that's the thing I'm worried about, because once you start chipping away at the Green Wedge, it was a great principle. People have defined what it is. If you start chipping away at that, that opens up the precedent for every other Green Wedge. I know we're only talking about this one, but it's there for a reason. It's a defined term, and it's there for a reason, and we should adhere to it and preserve it. It's a very good, strong, robust planning application, and it should be respected. What else can I say?
You have 30 seconds.
Okay, I will sum up. I'm not so sure. I need to know more information, but one thing I would recommend, I've had the benefit of seeing the water, the dynamics of the water in action, and the Warners would very, very much like to invite the planning committee, if you're in any doubt about this, to look at that, because it is crucial for you to understand the mechanics of it and how it works and the fears if it goes wrong. So I will leave it at that. But please take that on board, and please really carefully consider this proposal. And you know, I'd like you to refuse it. I'd like you to refuse this on the basis of what everybody said. Thank you.
Councillor Hall, you should now leave because you've spoken off committee. So if you don't mind, like me, I left after I... Okay? Yes. Thank you.
Come and sit up here with
You
us.
will soon get the information, don't worry. We'll need you back later. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. It's good to see so many members of the public engaged in this very, very important application. I'm speaking in my capacity this evening, members, as a City Councillor and the Ward Member for Chelmer Village and Bewley Park. I've also been a resident of Chelmsford, was born here and been a resident of Chelmer Village since 2006. I wholeheartedly recommend that before determination, members do undertake a site visit and also accept the kind invitation to see Barnes Mill in operation. And I understand there's a strict protocol for deciding this within the public forum of Planning Committee, and that it would fall to the chair along with a proposer, a seconder, and then the committee to decide in public and to decide this through a vote. I would also ask members this evening to consider the implications of an updated National Flood Risk Assessment, or NAFRA, which is due to be published imminently in spring 2025, according to their website on Government Today, along with the National Coastal Erosion Risk Map. The revised data may have several significant implications for housing developments going forward. So we're looking at site selection, where developers may well need to be more cautious in selecting sites for new housing projects, and areas identified as high risk for flooding or coastal erosion may require even stricter regulations and may be deemed unsuitable for development. We're looking at design and construction standards too with regard to flood risk, and housing developments in areas with moderate flood risk may well need to incorporate enhanced design and construction standards. Planning permissions too may well be affected, and local planning authorities such as ours are going to potentially use updated data to make more informed decisions about granting planning permissions, given the impacts of climate change. And applications for developments in high-risk areas may face stricter scrutiny or be denied to ensure that community is safe and resilient. Insurance and financing is also pertinent, and that properties in high-risk areas may face higher insurance premiums or difficulties in obtaining financing. This could also influence developers' and buyers' decisions, potentially reducing demand for housing in those specific areas. Finally, community resilience, which is the only positive I take from this projection of what we're going to see in the future, in that the data will help us as a community better understand our own flood risk and be able to take proactive measures to enhance resilience. This could include a community-wide flood defence or emergency planning and public awareness campaign. But overall, it's hoped that this new data will lead to more resilient and sustainable housing developments. I'm just sorry that the timing is such that you will not necessarily see this introduced before you determine the application, and this will be the pattern going forward, as we are, as Councillor Hall and others have stated, in the midst of climate change and increasingly turbulent conditions. Councillor Hall has covered very much about what I was wanting to speak. I would just like to look at green wedge, because this has come up and is pertinent to the local plan. You need to determine, members, whether the green wedge designation and the potential for flooding outweighs the provision of affordable homes in this location, not least for the people who may be moving there to live, and certainly for the existing residents. 411 of our local plan states that the local plan will seek to reduce the risk to people and the development of natural environment from flooding by discouraging inappropriate development in areas at known risk from flooding, and that new development will be focused in areas where there is no or low risk of flooding. That is in our current local plan. Where this is not possible, then the sequential test will be applied as outlined in the National Planning Policy Framework, followed if necessary by the exception test, which I understand has been calculated. But new development should also ensure that it does not exacerbate or create flood risk elsewhere. It should demonstrate it will be safe for its lifetime. And the sequential test and exception test, where that's applicable, have been undertaken for local plan site allocations. And just finally, Chelmsford contains a number of rich and varied landscapes. This is in our local plan, and new development proposals will need to respect their character and appearance and their role for wildlife and increasing biodiversity. The river valleys, where they permeate into Chelmsford's urban area, have a unique role and function and are identified as green wedge for that reason. New development proposals will also need to respond to the character and appearance of the built environment, in particular to conserve or enhance the historic environment, focusing development at the higher order settlements outside the green belt, and must respect the existing development pattern and hierarchy of other settlements. Those words are taken from our current local plan, and I will leave you to reflect on that as you determine the application. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing your comments as we enter hopefully a constructive debate. Thank you.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for letting me speak. I should explain that I am the chair, I am the Cabinet Member for Housing, so I am speaking up for those people who desperately need those houses that we're proposing to build. Several people have said that the housing crisis is a national problem. It is not. Yes, it is a national problem, but it is a problem here. It is a problem in Chelmsford today. We have 506 homeless households housed in temporary accommodation. Not all in Chelmsford, because we can't house them in Chelmsford. If those people, the adults and the children, were on our streets, people would appreciate, I think, that how important it is that we build those homes. But people can't see them because they're hidden. Not only are they in temporary accommodation, they're in temporary accommodation for a long time, especially those that are in need of 4-bedroom homes. They can spend up to at least 3 years in temporary accommodation. And the impact on any children in those homes, it's devastating and will be long term. And that's why I too am absolutely passionate. I've lived in Chelmsford. I'm not a native Chelmsfordian. I've lived in Chelmsford for 48 years. I am passionate about the Green Wedge. I think it's something that makes Chelmsford a brilliant place to live. Those wedges coming into that, and I want to preserve them. I absolutely assure you, I'm just as passionate as you are, Councillor Frosters, about those green wedges. I can remember talking to previous strategic planners and saying thank you for preserving those green wedges. But I went out and looked. At the beginning of this, I went out and looked at that area, and it is so suitable. It would be such a treasured resource. Please allow these homes to be built, and respect to the developers who I think have really worked hard to try and mitigate all of those harms. That I was very pleased that the planners went through in the report, but they worked so hard to mitigate those harms. And so I would make a plea for those people who aren't here, who aren't talking, who probably aren't as eloquent, those people who need those houses, those flats, and say, please, please vote in favour of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, before we go to the committee, do you want to come back with individual points, or?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
So we'll go through them chronologically. So we're starting with Mr. Frost. He's concerned about setting an unwanted precedent. So each planning application is to consider its own planning merits with the information and drawings submitted. As set out in the presentation and the committee report, it's considered the flooding impacts are acceptable based on the site-specific circumstances and the mitigation measures. So allowing this development wouldn't set unwanted precedents. As with any development, regardless of its location, it still needs to be in compliance or meet national and local policy requirements. Mr. Frost also did actually submit a couple of other points that he wasn't able to address in his statement, so I'm just going to cover those off too as well. So he said that his understanding is that the open space was donated initially as part of proposals in the 1970s to the County Council when they were the planning authority, and for when the development of Chelmsford Village came to fruition. On that point, the open space was identified for recreational purposes in the concept planning for Chelmsford Village in the 1970s, but no record can be found of any legal obligation to formally deliver the open space into or be passed into public ownership. He also asked the question of how the council can ensure the needy on our housing list gets the houses that are proposed. So the affordable rented units can only be occupied by those who have a local housing need, which is defined as persons on the council's housing register, and then that restriction is enshrined in this section 106. So moving on to Mr. Ford's points. So firstly, his point about the affordable housing being plan-led. The delivery of affordable housing is plan-led. That is the starting point. As set out in the Council's housing strategy, though, whilst we are maintaining a good supply of homes delivered through site allocations set out in the local plan, overall housing supply of affordable housing is just not keeping up with demand. And there is a particular and chronic need and undersupply of larger family homes. Hence the publication of the housing strategy to recognise this. In terms of the transferred land, so that land, as set out in the committee report and the presentation, is identified already as open space and recreational land through the local plan, so its importance and function is recognised. However, the land is in private ownership. So securing its future to be truly public and accessible can really only be achieved through public ownership, and public access of the site, with the exception of the public rights of way, can be curtailed at any time. So again, it's through public ownership that it can be truly accessible. It's the council's view that the transferred land reasonably meets the statutory tests, and ultimately it's a public benefit in the transferring of this land, so it can be used for public use. There's questions over the sequential test. So it's the council's consideration that the sequential test has been carried out in accordance with the National Planning Policy Framework and the Planning Practice Guidance. We are satisfied as a council that the sequential test sets out a clear, logical and justified approach, and we are satisfied that the sequential test is robust, and it's the council to determine whether that sequential test is acceptable or not the EA. They give advice on the overall procedure of the sequential test, but it's for the council to make that final determination. In terms of the site being a former compound, yes, that's acknowledged, but in terms of considering the landscape and heritage impacts, the committee report is very clear that has been considered in the context of the site being a rural and undeveloped field. Turning to heritage, so the heritage impacts have been fully considered within the report and the decision-making process. In terms of historic England, as I said in the presentation, there's no conflict between the City Council's position and Historic England's position. We've concluded that the harm would be less than substantial and great weight should be afforded to that harm. It should be noted that Historic England don't object to the proposal. That is not the recommendation in their response. Instead, they express concerns on the application on heritage grounds and direct the council to its statutory duty in affording great weight to the harm and whether there are public benefits that outweigh that harm, which the council has duly done. Turning to Mr. Woolner, in terms of his observations of the fields and flooding. So floodplains are natural flooding outlets for rivers. Their purpose is to slow runoff and to store floodwater. So in times of heavy rainfall, the fields that form part of the floodplain, so this is actually outside of development site, so that land to the south east, will have water on them. In terms of the site itself, where there is sort of been standing water and flooding, that coincides with that southern section of the site, which I showed in my presentation, where those it falls within those higher flood zones. And to deal or mitigate those higher flood zones, as set out in the committee report and the presentation, there are mitigation measures to address those higher flood zones. In terms of the EA data sets and mapping, there is no suggestion from the EA that these are incorrect. The Council works very closely with this statutory consultee, both in terms of the parameters of the local plan process and planning applications. He also raises comments about the character and appearance of the site, which I have already dealt with, and heritage. In terms of the length of time of the planning applications, yes, there are set timeframes which applications need to be determined in, but it is not uncommon for the Council to extend the life of the application where the application is complicated or further information is needed, and this is the case with this proposal. The main delay with this application was the need for a signalised crossing, which the Highway Authority identified was needed to make the development safe. So they would have objected to the proposal in absence of that. So the developer had to go away and design a toucan crossing that was in accordance with Highways requirements. And it's reasonable for the Council to extend the life of the application to understand if that objection can be overcome. There's questions on the transferred land that was raised, which I have already answered. Misleading information. My understanding from Mr. Woolner is that he considers the applicant's information, assertions of the site character, is misleading. He is able to make that observation, but in terms of how this site has been considered, as set out in the presentation, the committee report, we feel that we've assessed it appropriately and robustly in terms of the character and the context. Mrs. Woolner gave a lot of information about her experience in terms of flooding, and that's all noted, but I don't feel there was sort of a direct question in terms of that. Mr. Parker raised some questions or observations. His first one is that he felt that in his observation, the site falls within flood zone 3B.
We've got the pictures here if you want them.
We've seen all the pictures we need, thank you. Let
Apparently
us
not.
continue.
Whilst that is noted, the Environment Agency have confirmed in their August 23 consultation response that the site falls in flood zone 3A, so in that lower section of the site. In terms of the the groundwater readings and the period they were taken, neither the Environment Agency or the lead local flood authority have raised objections or concerns to that.
Use your objectivity then.
Look, I will clear the audience. You need to hear this information. Please leave it to us now. Thank you.
Turning to Mr. Coley, I think. Apologies, I've got your name wrong. So he firstly said that the applicant's transport assessment doesn't conclude that a signalised crossing is justified. As I've said, that might have been the case. However, it's the Highway Authority who concluded that it was necessary to make the development safe, hence why it's now included in those proposals, and it is one of the reasons why the application went on reconsultation at the end of last year to take account of that change. There are questions on the transport assessment, which I'll soon pass over to my highways colleagues. But a final observation of themselves is that the northern, who's talking about sort of the site entrance falling within the flood zone. The northern section of the site falls within flood zone 1, and that's where the site entrance and exit is. So just to turn to his point on the transport assessment, my colleagues will answer that point.
Thank you. Yeah, so the developer submitted a transport consultant, which was,
Can you speak up a little? Sorry.
Yes, can you hear me now?
That's better.
Thanks. The developer submitted a robust transport assessment, and this was reviewed and considered by the Highway Authority. This showed no severe impact on the highway network within the vicinity of the site, sort of in accordance with the MPPF guidance. The signal crossing, as JD said, was required by highways to facilitate safe crossing across the dual carriageway for both pedestrians and cyclists. This is to access the bus stops and also the retail park and other local facilities and services, which is also a safety benefit for all.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, right. Now I'm going to...
Sorry. Sorry, Chair, I'm still going, unfortunately, to make sure that I answer all the questions on observation raised. That was just to pass it over to the Highways Authority on that point. Yeah. So you still got me a bit more, sorry. So turning to the Parish Council, again, they raised concerns about sort of the data sets, and I've answered that. Turning to policy DM2, the committee report makes it very clear that the council doesn't consider the development falling within the provisions of DM2. So it's not a rural exception site. Instead, it's being considered an exception to the development plan and an exception to the principle of development being unacceptable as a starting point. In terms of the harm to the character and setting, again, the committee report makes clear that the council accepts that there will be landscape harm and less than substantial harm to the heritage assets, and there will be a change in the character and appearance of the site and the wider area. It is reasonable to consider and assess the wider locality. So, as raised in the committee report, the southern side of Chelmsford Village Way is inherently more rural, but the northern side, where the urban area lies, is in itself urban. So when you're looking at the site, you have to take it in its totality in the round, and that includes the retail park, and that forms part of the site setting and location. So it's reasonable for us to consider that, as well as everything else around the site, as part of that consideration to landscape, character and harm. In terms of the transfer land, again, we feel there's a link between the application site and the transferred land. The land does have some public rights of way, but again, it is in private ownership. And to make it public and truly accessible, it's through public ownership. Included in the Section 106 is a contribution for 2 years maintenance and management of the land to allow the council to do initial enhancements to that land. So, and I mean in the sense of sort of seating and dog bins, etc. So there is a contribution in place for that initial management and enhancement. And then finally, I think the Parish Council again just raised some concerns about traffic and congestion. Again, as I said, the Highways Authority raised no concerns about that, which also has been covered by Sophie. Councillor Hall spoke, and in terms, firstly, of the 5-year land supply, as I said, we are delivering sites through our local plan and those allocated sites, but essentially, again, it's the fact that demand cannot keep up with supply. In terms of the precedent on the green wedge, we have acknowledged there is harm to the green wedge. This application doesn't change its status, and just because it may be potentially, if the committee decides to agree with the recommendation of approval, it doesn't mean then the rest of the green wedge will be built on. There are very clear restrictions in place, and again, we're in the realms of considering exception to a general policy of restraint. In terms of the displaced water, so surface water, so it's an agricultural field at the moment. So surface water isn't managed. So you are going to sort of get ponding of water on the fields. So it's through sustainable urban drainage that that surface water is managed. In terms of Councillor Moore's comments about so that update to the flood mapping being brought in, by the Environment Agency in the spring, the EA, of course, would have been aware of this update, and if they considered it was pertinent to this application, it would have been part and parcel of their consultation response and consideration as part of this application. Until this is published, we don't know the implications of the update. So we have to consider the application as it currently stands, as per the mitigation measures that are proposed, and as per the position of the Environment Agency. And I think that is covering all the points.
Thank you. I'll now open this to the committee. Now, this is the point at which the committee will decide what they've heard, what you've said, all the information that we've already seen before we came tonight, and that includes everything you've been showing us, okay? So now let the committee decide, and I want quiet for them to talk, okay? Thank you. Who would like to start? Councillor Thorpax.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we've heard a lot of reasons this evening why we should not build on the site due to the significant harm to the conservation area, it being in the flood zone, amongst other reasons. And from what I've heard, there isn't a strong enough case to allow building in the higher risk flood zones, and that alone, I think, should weigh heavily in any decision we make this evening. A reason given in favour of this site is that it's near the current urban boundary. But if we allow building in the green wedge, then the urban boundary will keep shifting. Eventually, it'll be lost altogether. And it seems to me that that sets a dangerous precedent, and the City Council policies, after all, do tell us that we shouldn't be building in the green wedge anyway. I represent Writtle, and the green wedge separating Writtle from urban Chelmsford is absolutely key to that village's intrinsic character. It stops us being absorbed into West Chelmsford. I imagine the same is true for Chelmsford Village, and we shouldn't underestimate the harm done by losing pieces of our green wedge. Alongside this, we do have the local plan, and the council is on target with its housing numbers, so why add another site? I understand we face a housing shortage, but we should be meeting that need through the local plan rather than speculative development sites. Thank you.
Sorry, carry on.
I assume you mean me. Okay, thank you. I actually have a question about something different. It was a question about neighbour relationships, and not just that, but the density of the housing in terms of the space that it's on, because we're lowering the parking allocations. The fire service seems to be raising some concerns about access to a certain point of the site. And so I really had a question about whether, because the housing is going into this quite small part of the site, because of that, as I understand it, most of that part of the site is flood zone 1. If actually it's overdevelopment, I know that hasn't been talked about at all, but is it, those things seem to indicate to me that actually the density of the housing is too much and that the houses are too close together. So I just wondered if you could address that for me. Thanks.
Please do.
Yep, that's absolutely fine. Firstly, as I said, we are in the context of the council's local policies maps within the city centre. So it is quite normal for the scale and density in those locations to be higher, but they still need to be proportionate to the site. One of the reasons for the lower parking provision is essentially Firstly, the awkward nature of the site, as I said. So, as you would have seen, it starts to narrow to the west. So it's not a traditional site. So it does make it quite awkward to get that block enclosure. And that's really important. To try and get those perimeter blocks ensures that you're not having exposed parking, you're not having exposed real elevations and so on. So the developer has worked hard to try and get those perimeter blocks. But with those perimeter blocks, they are being placed as the site tapers further to the west. So it's not necessary that it's overdeveloping the site, it's more the fact that the awkward nature of the site, trying to get good design principles, and also taking account of, maximising the use of the site and the density of the site, bearing in mind it's a city centre location.
Who else would like to speak? Councillor Tron.
Thank you. I've got a couple of points I'd like to raise, if I may. Which are... so we've heard a lot from residents tonight about the flooding concerns, and obviously have, materials been shared with us to demonstrate this from their perspective. So I just wanted to get a bit more insight from officers around. There appears to me to be a disparity in the perception of the flood risk in that area by residents who live in that area, parish council and city councillors, and the reporting that officers are basing their recommendation on. Councillor Moore referred to the upcoming expected updates to guidelines assessments. I appreciate you've already covered that. But what I would like to understand is if these assessments and reports were done, a reasonable time ago. It's been acknowledged that this has been a long process in getting from proposal to this point. Where comes the point where perhaps reports of that nature need to be revisited? So I'd be interested to understand whether there's any statutory requirement, regulatory, legal requirement around that and the timeframes. So that's essentially my first point I wanted to raise. The parish council have shared that former application was refused. There's been discussion or an acknowledgement around the Toucan crossing and the fact that that had to be factored in. I'd like to understand whether the former application was refused because the Toucan crossing was required, or were there other reasons? So what's the difference between the application that was refused and this application, please? I'm unclear at the moment. This land that we're talking about, it's privately owned, I believe, from everything that's been presented to me. And then there's been this constant reference to public ownership. I'm not sure I fully understand what is meant by that, in the sense of, at the moment, as this is private land, can residents of Chelmsford Village currently access that private land and use it for recreational purposes? There's been discussion about the provision of the country park and the orchard. I would like to understand how that is going to be funded on an ongoing basis. Are there going to be service charges levied on the residents, or is the intention that the City Council will take on that responsibility? I'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you.
You can always come back.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do you want to go through those points?
Yes, absolutely. Apologies if I miss anything. Please tell me if I do. In terms, firstly, of the residents' observations, I absolutely appreciate that. They are the ones that live next to the site, adjacent, in close proximity to the site. However, we have to base our decisions on the evidence that's presented to us.
What is the evidence?
Either through official environmental flood mapping, which has been done, and also the information that's been submitted as part of the planning application, so that flood risk assessment, which is required for a development of this type, and the hydraulic modelling assessment. We also, of course, consult statutory consultees, so they get in part of that process as well. So they are looking at that evidence too, so their own as well as what's been submitted. So, and they've come back, as we know, raising no objections to the proposal. So we have to take a pragmatic approach based on facts and evidence, and we feel that we have done that. In terms of the legal requirements of reports, yes, appreciate it, the life application has sort of been extended because of those various reasons, most notably highways. If there was something fundamentally changing in regulations that would affect this proposal, we would certainly take that consideration whether additional reports or information need to be submitted. We don't feel that's the case here. As we've said, those updated flood mapping is coming in the spring. Again, I can't predict at the moment what they will say, so it's very difficult for me to say that those would have an impact or not. We have to base it on the current circumstances. And again, as I said, if the EA felt that they would have a significant impact, they would have raised that to ourselves. In terms of the refuse application, can I just clarify, is that the one that you're talking about in 2004? That's in the committee report that says it was refused. Is that the one that you're referring to? Just so I'm clear.
So yes.
Yes, it is.
You.
Okay, fabulous. Okay. So essentially that was for, my understanding was for a hotel, if I am correct. So yes, that was for a public house, a restaurant, a hotel, a day nursery, and parking with a country park as well. The point of that is that it's a different form of development. So we are in the realms of looking at a specific form of development that has been identified as a desperate need. There's a chronic undersupply of affordable housing. So that is the key point. That is the key difference. We're not in a national housing crisis for a hotel or restaurant, but we are in a national housing crisis and a local housing crisis for affordable housing. So the difference is the form of development that's being proposed. In terms of the ownership of the land, yeah, it is in private ownership, but it has public rights of way through. So that's where the accessibility is. So the public is allowed to use that public's rights of way. But my point is that, yes, that would still be the case if the developer or the applicant decided to take away the rest of access to that site. But I think, as people are aware at the moment, that site is used quite well by the public, quite informally. So they may deviate slightly off those public routes. Which at the moment they are allowed to do. There's no prohibition there, but that could change at any time, and it would just have to stick to the public rights of way. In terms of the orchard, so that's forming part of the public open space, and the applicant has indicated that would be maintained and managed by the City Council, so they would be giving it over to the City Council, and there are contributions to deal with the maintenance, the future maintenance management of that. So that is set out at section 7 of the committee report. So the liability would be on us, but we're getting contributions to manage that liability. I think that's covering everything, I believe.
So just in relation to my first point around the flood risk and the reporting, can I check, it's not unreasonable then for the reporting that was done, apologies, I can't remember exactly when this reporting was done, in comparison to now looking to bring this to committee in January 2025, it's considered that that is not an unreasonable length of time in between those two things? I appreciate what you said about significant changes, etc., but...
Yes, so the flood risk assessment and hydraulic report were actually updated in October 2025 as part of those changes to the application. And what that change was that they were slightly moving the bund from where it was positioned in the flood risk assessment that was originally submitted as part of the application. So there was an actual update. So that is the most up-to-date assessment that has been submitted. So it is only a couple of months old, actually, from between now it's submitted and Planning Committee.
Councillor Sampson.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to say first thanks to the officers, because I think you've been very upfront about where this kind of falls in and out of normal development, so we can make a really informed decision about where we want to kind of do things differently from things that wouldn't have come to committee, because the answer was clear. I think very reluctantly, I don't see how I could personally vote to approve this, and everyone who comes to this committee knows that it's extremely rare that I would vote against any sort of housing development for the needs that have been outlined around the housing crisis. But the policy of the Green Wedge is very clear, the boundary of the road is very clear, and the additional risk of floodplain that I've seen dozens of times in the kind of 2 to 3 years I've lived in that area makes me feel that I don't think I can make a special case for building on this area that has been protected for a reason. And I know that is very sad, given the housing need.
Well, we've got to let everybody speak.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak? Yes, please.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
Hazel, I couldn't remember your surname.
So I'm not really here. Thank you, Chair. Just sort of simple question, but probably not a simple answer. You mentioned early on that the bund would be on 3 sides and would protect the site from flooding. How can we be assured that this is future-proofed against inevitable climate change, say in 5-10 years' time? What if the bunds are breached or fail in some way? Who is financially responsible for securing that housing development should that happen? Thank you.
So the bund has been designed to take account of the 1 in 100 flood event, which is appropriate for the southern sections of the site, and taking account of climate change. So it does take that into consideration, has been designed to a height to do that. There is a condition that seeks the further detail of the bund, the maintenance of the bund, and you'll see on the green sheet as well, to also secure it in perpetuity.
The bund is unsinkable like the Titanic.
Please. Come on, you've got to leave it to us. You may actually make things more difficult for yourself. Right. Yes, Councillor Hyland.
Thank you, Chair. This has been a long-standing application, and you'll all know that affordable homes has been a real matter of concern for me in my tenure as a councillor. But hearing what I've heard this evening and reading the reports, I believe this is a high risk to the city. It's not in the local plan. It's speculative, and I think it's inappropriate and misuse of the green wedge, as other councillors have said. And I suggest this puts the city, property owners, and housing sustainability at a greater risk. I think the harm overlooking is setting a precedent for future developments. I would like to be clear that we are weighing these well. Could you give me a little bit more insight to how you weigh up the risk of flooding, which seems to be the material issue that has been brought to this council this evening, over all that you see is good? Thank you.
So, as you would have seen in the committee report and the presentation, we have weighed up the harm and benefits of the scheme. So we have assessed the harm Flooding is not included as part of that weighted balance, that assessment, because we consider the flood impacts acceptable through the various mitigation measures and through no objections being raised by the Environment Agency.
Yep.
Just to come back, over the period of time of this application, I visited those sites multiple times in multiple conditions and have my own photographic evidence of some of the flooding that has taken place there. So I think we should listen carefully to what's been said here today and make our determination based on the information that we've been provided. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Dobson.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened, I've sort of waited to speak because I wanted to hear really what everybody's got to say. In my opinion, I rarely disagree with officers, but on this occasion, I cannot remember an application that I'm more unhappy with. I absolutely accept the need for the affordable housing and the impact on the planning balance, but in view of the shortcomings of this site, I really can't agree that it's appropriate in this time. The council places great weight and emphasis on the protection of the green wedge, and I'm surprised that the recommendation is to approve development here. And I'm also, like a lot of other people, who are concerned at the potential for a precedent, and the gradual erosion of the green wedge is often a slippery slope. However, if the principle of development here is overcome, as far as the exceptional circumstances, there is a host of other issues which make this site unacceptable, in my opinion. For example, the heritage and the conservation area. The comment was no benefits resulting from this application that would outweigh the harm to the heritage assets. To me, this weighs significantly against the application, as once the damage is done, it can't be repaired. The removal of 30 trees, some protected, along with 2 groups and 2 woodlands. The officer report states that this would normally be resisted. Again, it's a negative point on that. Flooding, I won't dwell much on that because that's already been done. I've lived here for 30 years and I've seen the area myself flooded exceptionally. I won't say any more than that. The gift of the land, the application implies that the land is required to join up this side of the river with a new country park at Sandford Mill. I don't believe this is so. There is a significant network of public rights of way which give considerable public access to that land already. And just a point from what the planning officer mentioned, public rights of way are definitive and enshrined in law and kept in perpetuity. There is, regardless of land ownership, it is very unusual for public rights of way not to be kept in perpetuity. So that, to me, whilst the gift of the land is undoubtedly a plus point, it no way, for me, does it make the scheme acceptable and doesn't place any weight in the planning balance for me. The scheme, going to the scheme itself, if we overcome all of that, looking at the scheme itself, it doesn't comply with minimum standards as far as parking, the play space, the back-to-back and flank distances, garden sizes on several plots, the list goes on. And again, my thoughts really, leaving aside the principle of development here, if this scheme had been a normal scheme, normal commercial scheme, and I'm talking about the actual buildings themselves now, it would probably not have got to this stage. And it just seems that it's almost just maybe, but it's okay, it's affordable housing. And to me, that doesn't sit right with me. And really weighing up the balance, I cannot support this application, and I would suggest refusal on the following grounds, which is development in the green wedge, which conflicts with the local plan, the heritage and conservation area development conflicts with the local plan, the removal of large numbers of trees, some being protected, and the development itself does not conform to policy standards. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. This is important now. Does anyone else wish to speak before we take Councillor Dobson's point? Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. It was raised actually last week about management plans for the conservation areas and the lack of us having them as a council. And it seems a shame in this case that we don't have a management plan that we can better assess the harm on this conservation area against, because that would give us the specific characteristics of this conservation area that should be maintained and enhanced. And without that, we're all going off the bits about it we love, so that's a shame. It's a shame actually also in the local plan that we don't possibly have a broader depth of information ourselves to check some of the claims against. And obviously there is lots of detailed information, but some of that information goes against other information that we've seen, and it would be nice if we had an independent cross-check against that, which we don't have fully at this time. So the scheme itself, you started almost with everything of why we would normally not approve this, and then we contrasted it back against the sort of exceptions. The exceptions are really important ones, and I do really hold that. But unfortunately, I feel the exceptions that we're holding against are issues of either national government problems or our local problems that we are in power to fix. I mean, we could make more areas of Chelmsford greener and connected and therefore would have equal benefit. We could provide affordable homes, although it's hard and there's challenges against. I know that's a difficult. And then the benefit of the sort of green space back, it just sort of seems like, have we investigated this site fully enough? Because there's so many benefits to us that it will save us money and provide us housing and provide us lots of green space, that have we possibly, is that making the site shinier than it should be, and could all those mitigations be provided by ourselves in a better location? So that's what I'm slightly concerned about.
Thank you. Now, is there anyone else who wants to speak? Councillor Frascona.
Yeah, it's a very difficult case because it's very finely balanced on both sides. There's so many strong arguments on both sides of the question. I am very persuaded by Councillor Foster's speech about the affordable housing. I know people are desperately in need of it, and this site is between, it's on the road, it's on the edge of the urban area, and there's the road on one side and housing on the other, and the shopping centre. So I don't feel that it would be very intrusive. Also, I mean, I walk past this area regularly. I know it does flood, but the water is mainly on the southern section, just on the southern section of the site, and I think the bund would protect it. But I'm very torn, because I also would like to protect the green wedge, which I think is very important. It's a very difficult balancing act, but I'm inclined to put more weight onto the affordable housing.
Okay. Councillor Wilson.
I think my views are fairly simple on this. Whether you recognise the flooding issue or not, I mean, admittedly on the government website that doesn't help, because it does say it's a low risk area of flooding where this is. But I think the green wedge is absolutely paramount, and therefore I'll be voting to refuse this application for the reasons, all the reasons that have previously been said, because I just think it's in the wrong place. It doesn't need to be here. It needs to be elsewhere.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Dobson has put forward. Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to comment again a little bit about my decision, and a lot of what Councillor Dobson said I agree with about the site itself. I think, as was kind of raised earlier, that if this was an application that wasn't affordable housing, I think there's quite a lot of issues with it. In terms of the flooding, I do think as a planning committee, we have to look at the statutory consultees and look at what they say and follow their guidance. And I absolutely understand why. Therefore, we would be saying that the flooding isn't the primary concern. And for me, it isn't the primary concern. When I was reading the report, it was the balance between the harm and the affordable housing. And I absolutely hear the people on the housing register who need affordable housing and need 4-bedroom houses. I absolutely hear that. But the harm being done on this site, there's so many harms in the list that I think ultimately I'll have to vote against the application.
Okay, thank you. We have a suggestion from Councillor Dobson. Can you put that again, please? Your reasons.
Would you like me to make a proposal?
Yes.
Sorry, apologies.
I'm assuming
I've got
that's
too many
what
bits
you're
of paper. I'm all over the place. Would you like me to make? Would you ask for a proposal? Okay. In that case, I propose that application number 23-01105 FUL is refused on the basis of development in the Green Wedge, which conflicts with the local plan, the heritage and conservation area conflicting with the local plan, which I believe is DM13, removal of large number of trees, some being protected, which I believe comes under DM17, and the development itself does not conform to policy standards, which I believe comes under DM23. I'm sure that is a far better wording than that than I can, but there, to me, is the basis of refusal.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Thorpe, perhaps a seconder. We have a proposer and a seconder.
We do, Chair, but just to remind you, the normal procedure for the committee is that the committee are minded and we defer it.
To a vote.
So can I just clarify, if this is a proposal to actually refuse the application on the night, we will have to have detailed wording for the reasons for refusal. Our normal practice is a proposal to defer,
would have done that.
because the committee are minded to refuse it for those reasons, and we would bring it back with detailed reasons for refusal, as is normal practice.
Yes, I concur. That is exactly what I would have said. So that is the proposal. Can we have all those in favour of refusal? Thank you. Any abstentions? I'm going to be an abstention. Therefore, the application has been refused.
Sorry,
wait a minute. Sorry.
The application, as I understood it, Chair, the application has been deferred until the next meeting.
It's a weird idea.
Just refuse.
No. We have to come back with the reasons that we have to accept those reasons. So our staff member is quite correct. It will come back next time for the reasons to see if we can accept those reasons for refusal. Okay? Thank you, everybody. You've been...
thank you, councillors.
Right, can you please... The word deferred. They don't understand.
I think from the public point of view, they need to know that it's actually refused on the night. In practice, it's refused on the night because we just bring back reasons. The committee won't go against that. It's just that we don't have time to...
Can you please...
Chair, can we have a comfort break, please?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that one was going to be tough. Yeah. Everyone, can you? Sorry. Thank you. Can you have a little quiet now, please? Now then, I will not be taking one application after 9:30, so I will take one, and it will be Pippin's. My apologies to anybody who can't stay, and the other application will be brought back. My apologies. But it's been a long evening and we can't keep people that long. Okay, Pippin's Place, Hellman's Lane, West Hanningfield, CM2 8UW. Can I have the officer's report, please?
Thank you, Chair. We're in West Hanningfield, in the village of West Hanningfield, and the application site shown there with the blue star is within the defined settlement boundary. So development is acceptable in principle. You can see there also the green annotations. The site does back onto the green belt, but the plot itself and the existing bungalow is not within the green belt. It's within the defined settlement. So this is the existing bungalow. As you can see, it's a single story, low level, wide span. It has two access points. The one in the bottom right photograph is directly off Hellman's Lane. And then the second access, which is in the larger left-hand side photo, the access is off a private track, which then quickly goes onto Hellman's Lane. The private track leads to a property at the back known as Doylan's. Main issues are set out in your agenda pack: design and character of the area and how the development fits in with that, the impact on neighbouring amenity and parking provision. So I will start with the first one, which is how the development to replace the bungalow with two-storey buildings would fit in with the street scene. And as the report explains, there is a mix of property types along Hellman's Lane, and we've got single storey, we've got 1.5 storey, we've got 2-storey. And the photographs there are showing you the houses in the most close proximity. So we have a 2-storey in the far left, and then we have a 1.5 storey, and then we have the application site itself, single storey. Obviously, next one to that is Dewey Sant, which is single storey. Next to that is 2-storey. The houses or the buildings all follow a roughly linear placement along the road. Pippin's Place, though, is at a bit of a skewed angle to the street, so it is a bit of an anomaly in that way, but it's not harmful in that respect. And to say the images there show the great variety in architecture and scale and materials, etc. So the proposal you will have seen is to pop in two-storey buildings on the plot. The colours there are trying to show you in terms of scale. So the single storey at the moment are blue, the 1.5 yellow, and the pinky colour are 2-storey, and then replicating that underneath, again to show that yes, the plot would change because a single storey wide property would be replaced with 2 taller, narrower properties. And whilst they would be taller than the existing in terms of the wider street scene, it would be hard to argue that they would be so out of kilter to be a refused planning application. There is obviously a more stepped height difference between plot 2 and the bungalow Duisont to the right, but we do have that private access between the two that gives that extra buffer, so that change in height isn't going to be so obvious or harmful within the street scene. So officers are content that whilst there would be change on the plot, that change is not so harmful to character to justify any refusal of planning permission. In terms of neighbour relationships, the 2 closest properties are Carmel and Duisont. Plot 1, as you can see there, sits kind of parallel to the side elevation of Carmel, with approximately 5 metre distance between, and there is some landscaping along that boundary, and the north point is to the left, so plot 1 is to the south side of Carmel. And then on the other side, plot 2, we have that private track between, and we've got 7.5 metres sort of building separation distances. So in the normal scheme of things, officers are content that that relationship is an acceptable one. You can see there Carmel and its property to the left, they're tied together, and then Duisont and its neighbour that sits forward. Again, a slightly different arrangement. So again, in terms of fitting in with the street scene, the placement of those buildings is acceptable and not out of keeping. Parking and access to the proposal. As I mentioned earlier, the existing property has got an in and out access, so the proposal for 2 houses looks to keep those 2 accesses and split them. Plot 1 would have the northern access, plot 2 would have the southern access. The proposal also includes a shared garage building in the middle forward of the plot, so one property would have one garage building half and the other plot would have the other. The internal space standards of the garages don't actually meet our minimum requirements, but it doesn't matter because the frontages of each plot have got enough space for 2 parking spaces in any event. So the development achieves our parking standards and the accesses are acceptable. There is no objection from the Highway Authority. So brief summary there, Chair. We're in the defined settlement. Principle is acceptable. Form and scale is similar. They fit in. The site is actually quite well screened by planting and landscaping. Design is in keeping, and we're content with relationships with neighbours. There's sufficient parking, and we will achieve through conditions some further landscaping enhancements in the normal way, and the application is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Tom P. to speak.
First of all, good evening. If I
Could you get a bit closer to the microphone?
good evening. If I get a bit stuck, please stay with me. I'm not used to doing this sort of thing. Right. As in my previous submissions to the Planning Department, I wish to strongly object to this development. I have read the Planning Officer's guidance notes with the suggestion that 2 houses should be approved. Despite me spending nearly 200 hours researching and preparing my report of over 1,000 words with supporting photographs, it would appear that the officers have either failed to understand the scale of the development and the nature of the site, and the effect of this development on the fabric of the village, or have just chosen to ignore the consequences. Fortunately, the final decision rests in the hands of this committee. I am sure that you will have all studied the application and taken into account all of the detailed objections that I've been able to submit. As you will all realise, once you allow two huge, poorly designed houses to replace a bungalow on a site with 62 feet of road frontage, you will be opening the floodgates to replace hundreds of thousands of similar bungalows throughout Essex, in this village and in the villages where you all live. I cannot possibly cover the points I have previously submitted in the 2 minutes. However, these are some of the key points. The development of nearly 6,000 square feet is far too big for the site, bringing with it many undesirable consequences. The designs do not reflect the village design code, the local houses, or what should be built in a narrow country lane which is only 15 feet wide. The heights stated in the drawings are not what will be built once the slope of the site is allowed for. The buildings will be at least a metre higher than shown on the developer's propositions. They have stated there will be an increase in habitat. This is not true. The submitted survey was taken after they had already removed around 20 trees and some hedge lines last year. Sorry. The privacy statement is wrong. The windows in the side of my house are for 3 bedrooms. They were placed here under the guidance of the head of planning in 2002. The new building is 1 metre from our boundary, directly facing and the development overshadowing our bedrooms.
I'm sorry. I mean, I have all that information here, so don't worry. We have it. But you have exceeded your 2 minutes now, okay?
No, it's not okay.
Thank you. Can we have now...
Is that it? Is that all I get? 2 minutes?
2 minutes of
This affects the rest of my life and I get 2 minutes?
You get 2 minutes because we all have the information in front of us.
Well,
okay?
well I hope everybody's ready.
Thank you. We have.
Your highways officer says that the entrances to the site are on Hellman's Lane, not in the private road at the side.
Thank you. Can I have Andrew Hammond? Sorry? Not there? Right, okay. I didn't realise one person was not turned up, but we have their information.
She said she couldn't come.
Is that the lady who's not well?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Is that Scanes? Is there a councillor here, a parish councillor? Yes. Ah, please, come.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I didn't know you were here, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, thank you, Madam Councillor and Madam Chairman, Councillors. Yes, I'm Parish Councillor for West Hanningfield.
Right.
So the Parish Council believes that, essentially to build 2 5-bedroom properties on a site of a single bungalow in a very small, quiet lane, it can only be classed as overdevelopment. There's no other term for it. It's also not in keeping with the village design statement, which can't be ignored. Heard the word precedent used quite a few times tonight. We need to bear in mind there are numerous similar properties to this bungalow in the village, at least 40 maybe, and some of those are on the market for sale. Approving this application, to me and the Parish Council, would give the green light to any developer to do exactly the same thing or similar, which would have a significant negative impact on the general characteristics of a rural setting, namely our village. We're a small village, we are not a town, we're not a city. The Parish Council is also not aware of any similar applications being approved where a bungalow has been replaced by 2 large houses. So this isn't just an issue for West Hanningfield, it sets a precedent for all rural locations. I can imagine if this was approved, local developers, would be chomping at the bit to get their hands on any similar bungalow that be available in other villages, some of which you may live in. And I think the important thing is we all have a duty to protect those villages. this does little to benefit any housing crisis, doesn't benefit the village. It's merely being done for commercial benefit. So on that basis, we would ask you to reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Another time, if you're here, you may come down and sit. And
Yes, I'm aware of that. I chose to sit with the residents.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you for your information. Councillor Dobson.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members and officers. I have been asked to call in this application to committee because of the concern expressed by local residents regarding the acceptability of the two proposed new dwellings to replace the existing bungalow. Firstly, the size and heights of the two proposed dwellings are too large and overbearing when considering their position in the street scene. The height of house number 1 is taller than Carmel, the house next to it, despite the fact that it is positioned lower down on the land, which is an incline. Secondly, house number 2 is unacceptably overbearing to Dewy Sant, a bungalow next to it, even when considering the increased space encompassing the Doylands access lane. The side windows in Dewy Sant are habitable rooms, bedrooms, and there is a concern that this will block the light. It will block these rooms' natural light, contravening development standards B18 and the local plan. The land levels in the drawing should be checked for accuracy, as it is understood that the actual build levels could be over a metre higher than that depicted on the plans. The sizes of the garages allocated to each plot are not compliant with the standards as arranged by Essex Highways. It has been pointed out that the access to house number 2 is onto a private lane, and whilst I accept this is not a planning matter, if the application is approved, it will not be deliverable and there will need to be a further application to remodel the frontage to allow access directly onto Helmers Lane. For this to be possible, the removal of several trees along the frontage will be necessary, which would be unacceptable. In summary, I ask members to consider these points and refuse this application on the basis that the proposed properties are overbearing to the neighbouring properties and are out of place within the street scene, contravening policies DM23 and policy DM29 with regard to the unacceptable overshadowing of Dewy Sant. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Before we go to the committee, do you wish to come back with some information?
Yes, Chair, if I can just maybe respond to the two public questions that were made. Mrs Hammond, I understand, is not here this evening. Her supporting statement members will have read. Just to draw to members' attention, the application site is not within the green belt. I understand that Mrs Hammond's property, Doylands, which is the one at the rear, is in the green belt, but this property and this site is not within the green belt. I showed you the defined settlement drawing to demonstrate that. And we've heard a couple of comments about the access track, which currently serves as the southern site access to Pippin's Place. And as I showed in the photographs, it doesn't come directly off Helmans Lane, it comes off the track a metre or two in. It's a private matter, as members will know, land ownership and what legal discussions may or may not need to take place over whether the access can or can't be used are outside our consideration. In terms of the comments that Mr Peed made this evening, concerns about the buildings being too big, there's no minimum or maximum size in terms of a building here. It's looking at it as a planning application, assessing all the issues, and is it an acceptable form of development or not. And in officers' view, that the two buildings proposed fit on the site. They comply with all our development standards in terms of room sizes, garden provision, parking provision, and it's not overdevelopment in our opinion. The village design guide for West Hanningfield is quite an old document now. It was adopted pre-MPPF, so in terms of the weight we can give it as a material planning consideration, that is quite limited. I did manage to find a copy in our library, and looking at the general design guidance from the West Hanningfield Village Design guidance, it talks about huge mix of types and styles of dwellings in the village contributes to the rural feel. There is no standard building style. There's an eclectic mix of styles, but buildings are sensitively located in their plots, etc. I don't think this proposal is out of kilter with what the village design statement talks about in terms of there being no standard building style. It's an eclectic mix of buildings. We saw that from the images, that each of the buildings in that street scene is quite different. Building heights, there is a planning condition, condition 4, which requires levels and building height details to be submitted and agreed before they start work, so we can ensure that things don't start getting jacked up, as the neighbour and the ward councillor have fears about. That's a standard planning condition that we would use on many development sites. In terms of the habitat, there are planning conditions, condition 6 and condition 12. Condition 6 talks about general soft and landscaping on the plot. There's no suggestion that we're going to see any radical removal of what's there at the moment. And because of the nature of the development, condition 12 is the statutory requirement for BNG biodiversity net gain anyway. So again, that's a pre-commencement condition that still has to be worked through. And in terms of whether BNG is delivered on plot or whether it is delivered off-site, that's a matter to be resolved via condition, as is the normal practice with all new planning applications where BNG is a statutory trigger. In terms of privacy and windows, I understand there are windows in the side of Carmel. The bedrooms in that property are served also by front and rear facing windows. So in terms of the relationship with that property, even though the plot 1 is quite close, we are content that the relationship is an acceptable one. And I think I've covered the point about the vehicle access. That's a private matter between the owner of the lane and the applicant for them to resolve at a later date.
Thank you. Please do what we did before. Everyone has their chance. And I have the information as we should have it. Right, can I open this to the committee now? Who would like to speak? Come on, people. I know it's late, but it's still time to speak.
Can I just confirm, because that obviously squeezing in some houses into an existing plot with a single house and the access to light or affecting the buildings either side was mentioned. Can you just talk through that again? Is that a real issue, and does it affect planning in that respect?
Could we maybe also have some pictures of the proposal up? Sorry. Might help.
So, so in terms of the street
Could you put your microphone?
In terms of the street scene, you can see there how plots 1 and plot 2 sit beside their neighbours. The existing bungalow is quite a wide building, but obviously it's single story. The total width of the 2 replacement buildings is about, how much wider? It's in the report, a couple of metres wider in total. In terms of the relationships between the two properties, those are the distances between gable ends. So the property on plot 1 has been designed with a rear cutout, so it's not 2-storey across the whole of the back, and that part of plot 1 closest to Carmel is single storey to deal with that relationship. And you can see there the taller side elevation of plot 1 next to Carmel is pretty much parallel with Carmel's side elevation. The bedrooms to Carmel have front and rear windows. So in terms of that relationship, it's not uncommon and it's acceptable. Yes, it will change the current situation, but it's not harmful. And on the other side, we have that lane, that physical lane and landscaping between plot 2 and Jouissant. 7.5 metres is quite a separation between properties and side aspects. So again, we're content that the relationship is a comfortable one, Chair.
I just wanted to ask a question about overdevelopment. How do you determine whether this is overdevelopment or not overdevelopment? Because I imagine another application could come forward, and I know we only have to deal with the one in front of us. Another one could come forward a single building, right? So is it because it's 2 buildings it could be deemed overdevelopment? Thank you.
Meant to be for us to decide, but let's go back to the office.
I suppose, Councillor Highland, there's no set definition of what if a scheme is overdevelopment or not. We look at a number of aspects. So in this respect, we've been looking at the character of the street to start with, the how it fits in with the rhythm of the street, if there is a rhythm, how it fits in with the overall heights, and we saw from the drawings we're up and down here in the street in terms of ridge heights. We look at our standards in terms of parking and garden. These more than comply. If we had a site where every garden was too small and there wasn't enough parking and the bedrooms didn't meet standards, yes, we're probably then in the realms of overdevelopment, but we're certainly not in the realms of overdevelopment on this development site.
Councillor Frascano.
Yeah, as far as the objections, it seems to be that it's because it's 2 houses where there was 1 before. So would the objectors find it more acceptable if there was just 1 huge house instead of 2 medium-sized houses? I don't really see the problem if it's the footprint area is similar, and it's just giving homes to 2 families instead of 1.
Who else would like to come in? It's very quiet. Councillor Armstrong.
I will make one small comment on, I know in a lot of the local plans and our local housing need assessments within rural areas, accessible dwellings was highlighted, so the need for bungalows, particularly in a lot of our rural villages. So it is a shame that we are losing a bungalow, which possibly met the housing need assessment of the area, although it probably did require some work to make it fully accessible, to go to 2 houses. So there is a loss on that. My 2 concerns with the scheme, I think, have been quite well met with conditions in levels, particularly making sure that the ridge height does comply with what we've seen. The other one is the landscaping. I know there's talk about access. If that was to change, it's important that the landscaping, particularly that screening at the front, is withheld so that it fits within the street scene, but also the distance between the properties that is again kept, because it's the green windows through, which is again another thing that's picked up in lots of people's local plans, is the green windows between developments being maintained to make sure that there isn't anything inappropriate that comes in to block that.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak? Anyone? Well, in that case, if no one else wants to speak, I'll take it straight to a vote. I move that application 24-01468/FUL Pippins Place be approved, subject to the conditions detailed on pages 290 to 293. Gosh, shows how long the rest of it was, of the agenda pack. Do I have a seconder? I do. In that case, all those in favour? I think that's all in favour, so that application has been carried. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Are we still doing the planning appeals or not?
I'm just about where's it gone? Obviously, you have your... Where have they gone? We will defer the final item, and you can look at the applications that have already gone through at your leisure. Thank you very much, everyone, and thanks for your forbearance. Thank you.